community leaders. Thank you all for joining us. This is promoting healthy and safe relationships and addressing and preventing dating violence and sexual violence on college campuses. We are joined today by Shondell Dawson of the Family and Youth Services Bureau for the Administration for Children and Families. The ACF has so graciously partnered with the Office of Minority Health to bring you all this webinar. Some of their grantees will be presenting today, beginning with Chick Dabi of the Asian Pacific Islander Institute on Domestic Violence, Lumari Orozco, Casa de Esperanza, Umi Hankins of the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community, and Kate Vanderteeg from Futures Without Violence. Without further ado, Shondell, do you have some words for our attendees?
Thank you, Teddy, and good afternoon, everyone. As Teddy mentioned, I'm Shondell Dawson. I'm a Senior Program Specialist with the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program. We're in the Family Youth Services Bureau, and we're a part of the Department of Health and Human Services. And we're very pleased to be partnering with the Office of Minority Health to talk to you today about the impact of your role and work on campus and what that means for your peers and your colleagues that are impacted by domestic violence, and how to connect them to a network of domestic violence services and resources that we support across the country. For those of you who do not know, I just want to give a brief overview of the FVPSA program. So the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program implements the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. And we fund a network of local and domestic violence program services across the country, including state domestic violence coalitions, tribal domestic violence programs, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and a network of national special issue and culturally specific resource centers. As Teddy mentioned today, you will be joined by our grantees that represent the National Health Resource Center, as well as our 3 culturally specific special issue resource centers working within the African American, Latina, and Asian and Pacific Islander communities. Throughout the support of the FVPSA program across the country, we work with a network of domestic violence coalitions in each state and territory that provides training and technical assistance to local domestic violence programs. They partner with other statewide agencies, and they're leading important initiatives related to dating violence, domestic violence, and intimate partner violence in their states. The resource centers that we support include not only our culturally specific resource centers, but resource centers that focus on issues related to mental health and trauma, child protection and custody, the civil legal system, as well as working on to provide national clearinghouse for resources on information related to domestic violence. You will hear about some of those resources today, and we invite you to learn more about the network of services that we support across the country, because as you stand to provide support for your colleagues that may be experiencing intimate partner violence or are in an unhealthy relationship, there are resources available to be able to partner with you to help broaden your awareness and also connect your colleagues or your peers to confidential resources to get them the support that they need. As peer educators, we see that you're in a very unique position to keep folks connected across your campus, as well as maybe within the health centers and across the university administration, to be aware of resources that exist, to learn more about the impact of dating violence, and more importantly, understand what strategies are most helpful to offer support, to engage in conversation, and keep folks safe and healthy. So during this 90-minute session, you will hear from Kate, Chick, Umi, and Lumari to lead you through a very rich discussion about intimate partner violence, healthy relationships, support strategies, key considerations for cultural relevance, and bring all this together for what it means for your work and how we can best support you and stand with you in partnership as you go about implementing the requirements of the program in which the Office of Minority Health supports. So we hope that you will find this webinar to be helpful. We're looking forward to continuing to work with you. We see this as a beginning start of conversations. And I now would like to pass the floor to Kate.
Well, actually, Shondell, we have a couple of things we have to go over first. Thank you very much for your words. To let everyone know, all lines are on mute. We will reserve about 20 minutes after the ladies present for questions and answers. In the meantime, the chat box does work. So if you have any issues with audio or anything else, you can participate in the chat. Along with that, this will be a fairly interactive webinar as well, so please note your chat boxes on your control panel. There's also a poll question that our presenters will let you know when that will be made available. For the PPEs, this is the last webinar of the school year, so please remember to submit your candidates for the gold certificates soon. We know a lot of you all are graduating and school will be out, so please get those into me as soon as possible. Without further ado, we will now pass it to Kate, and enjoy the webinar, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Vandertuig. I'm the Health Program Specialist at Futures Without Violence, which runs the National Health Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Just want to thank Teddy and Chandel for that introduction, and thank the Office on Minority Health and the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program for bringing us together on this great webinar today. And thank you to all of the folks who are watching and listening out there. I know this is a busy time of the year, and we're glad you are sitting with us for this couple hour or two just to talk about these issues. So today we're going to be talking and going over dynamics of healthy relationships, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and trauma on college campuses. Then we're going to delve a little bit more into working with diverse communities and different cultural contexts. By the end, we'll be discussing your role as peer health educators and how you can promote healthy relationships and support survivors, as well as the tools you might find helpful in doing those things. So I'm going to have Teddy go ahead and bring up the poll. I just want to get a sense for everyone who is on right now. In your role as a peer health educator, has anyone ever approached you wanting to know more about healthy relationships, intimate partner violence, dating violence, or sexual assault? So go ahead and start filling out the poll. And I can't quite see the poll results, but maybe someone else could enter them into the chat box to let us know. So it looks like 76% of you, wow, a lot. So a vast majority of you said yes, someone has approached you about healthy relationships, intimate partner violence, dating violence, or sexual assault. So that doesn't surprise me. It's a really common issue, especially on college campuses. So I think this webinar is going to be pretty relevant for you all today. So we're going to start talking about healthy relationships, and what is that? So we like to say that it's people who are in dating, hooking up, hanging out, talking to relationships that are equal. One person is not feeling superior or inferior to the other person, and neither party is trying to gain or maintain power and control over another. So one note about this is relationship can mean a whole host of different things, from dating to something very casual. It doesn't have to be, the strict relationship. Another thing about this definition is it's a lot about what a healthy relationship is not. So we're just going to think really quickly about what it actually is. So healthy relationships do all of these things, and I'm sure you've kind of heard some of this before or know it more intrinsically, that it's about respect and trust and encouraging your partner to be the best selves, and it comes down to making them feel safe and respecting their boundaries. And then Chick was going to quickly talk about when relationships are sexual.
Yes. Kate, can you advance the slides, please?
Yes.
So this is Chick Dabby. So, Kate outlined the components of healthy relationships, but often, intimate partner relationships mean that the question of sexual sexuality, what the sexual relationship, enters very quickly into these discussions between partners or couples. By sexual, I want to be sure I'm not referring to sexual in the narrow sense that you have to be having intercourse or sleeping together, but there's a whole range of behaviors. And, that sexuality means excitement, newness. Being in a relationship means feeling loved, admired, cherished, but it also invokes anxieties and doubts, self-doubts, and are we, a good partner? Are we exciting? Are we pleasing our partners, etc.? So in the context of healthy relationships, what we want to emphasize around the negotiations and the discussions and the feelings around sex is that both partners feel equally able to negotiate, ask for, agree and disagree about what they want. Sorry, Kate, I still don't see the slide. So if you can put the slide up.
I think we're trying to bring them back up after the poll.
Okay.
All right, I'm bringing them back up now. Sorry about that, everyone. All right, can everyone see that? Great.
Yes, now we can see. So, again, to emphasize the equality. And some of that's a little tricky because we all want to please a partner, but what we want to emphasize in this webinar and training is that sense of pleasing a partner is mutual, and that it's not just the woman's role to try and be pleasing. Consent always has to be affirmative, so it doesn't mean that if you don't say anything, it means you've given consent, but it's always good to understand consent as an affirmative action. No means no, and we've all heard that over and over again, but it's at any point in the relationship. It's not, or at any point during sex. So that's the important part to emphasize about the no means no equation. And oftentimes, different arrangements on campuses, friends with benefits, etc. These arrangements and expectations and mutual understandings can change. Feelings can change, so it's important to be able to have a way that those changes can be expressed. And the old equation about, if you spend money on a date, if you take somebody out, and that it means that sex is owed to the spender, we definitely want to be sure that that message is no longer relevant, that spending money doesn't mean that sex is owed. Next slide. So here's a little very basic thing, and the slide is by the cartoonist, called it a feminist fantasy. I want us to think about, why is this a fantasy? Why isn't it just clear? Why isn't it just a basic expectation that when we say no, that's respected, and that's the end of the story? Next slide. Kate?
All right. Thank you, Chick. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about what healthy relationships and respecting boundaries looks like, we want to get into when it's starting to not look so healthy. So we like to talk about warning signs or red flags that you might see in relationships or with your friends or in your own relationships that kind of clue you in to thinking, wow, that's actually not healthy, or that's not okay, or those people don't really seem like they are on equal grounds in the relationship. So go ahead and enter into your chat box. What are some warning signs that you have seen in relationships, and this could be within your friends' relationships or in movies, that are maybe one of the first indicators that things are not so healthy and that things are not on equal grounds and that maybe a conversation needs to be had?
This is Chick. This is your moderator, Kate. This is your 3-minute warning.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing anyone enter anything into the chat box, which is okay.
They're entering into the questions box. So we have jealousy, excessive texting, Jason Frank says. We have controlling. Again, we have always texting to see where you are and who you are with.
Excellent.
Being overly concerned, we have in quotes. There are a lot of these, Kate. Isolation of partner.
Yep.
You want me to keep going?
No, I mean, that all sounds really resonating as to what I was thinking of as well, as warning signs that I'm familiar with and what I think we're all familiar with. So it sounds like you all have a really good idea of when things are starting to not look so healthy, which is great. And of course, we want to be able to have conversations before, when things start to not look healthy, and have conversations with our partners or talk to our friends about having conversations with their partners when we're seeing warning signs, like maybe you want to bring this up with your partner to talk to them about how that was not okay or made you feel uncomfortable, etc. So that's why it's good to pay attention to the warning signs before they do become unhealthy relationships, before a pattern does actually form. So we like to say that intimate partner violence is really a pattern of abuses. It's not a one-time thing where the two folks who are in the relationship, whatever that relationship might look like, one person is using methods and tactics to gain and maintain control over the other person. So a lot of what you guys brought up is also part of the pattern of abuses. So always trying to know where the partner is, spreading rumors, isolating the partner from their friends. And one thing to note is that while one person is got the power and control, they're trying to keep it that way, they're trying to gain more power and control of the situation, the other person might be using tactics that may look like this to survive in the abusive relationship. So it's not always easily discerning from the outside. That's just a good thing to know. So abuse can include kind of all the things that you all brought up. One thing that I want to highlight, or a couple things that I want to highlight, is using social status or privilege. This might be particularly relevant in a campus context where everyone is close together and in social networks are really a huge part of the experience. Another one I wanted to highlight that folks might not have heard about before or be thinking about would be more around coercive control and reproductive coercion, which could look like just controlling a partner's reproductive choices and individual autonomy. So sabotaging birth control by poking holes in the condom, not letting someone visit the doctor to get birth control or to learn about reproductive options, throwing or flushing birth control pills away, or forcing someone to get pregnant. So who are victims and survivors? They can be anyone across all lines of society. They develop coping skills on learning how to live with the abuse. They might love their abusive partner, and they know their abusive partner's potential for violence better than anyone else. Most importantly, they're so common. As you have heard the statistics before, people are experiencing intimate partner violence very frequently. Who are abusive people? They, again, can be anyone. They're often very jealous and controlling partners and might not be taking responsibility for their actions. They might be upstanding community members and using their social status or privilege to be controlling for their partner. They might be loving partners at times and may or may not be violent in other areas of their lives, and can often blame the survivor for the abuse. So just kind of setting the stage to talk about this in a college context. College-age women are at the highest risk for a whole host of different dating, sexual, and stalking violence, and that, I think, just underscores why it's important that you all are focusing on this issue. So I'm going to pass it back over to Chick, who is going to talk a little bit about the cultural context on the college campus.
So I'm Chick Dabby. I'm from the Asian Pacific Islander Institute on Gender-Based Violence, and I will start by talking just in general about the campus context and about Asian students in particular, and I'll be followed by my colleague Umi Hankins from the African American Institute, and then Lumari Orozco, who will be talking about Latina culture and the impact. So in general, of course, we know that coming to campus, is again, contains a lot of excitement and of course anxiety. And what's really different and new is the independence, being away from home. So in general, you're in a new setting, you're navigating new support systems, meeting people you have to get along with in some ways, going to classes, etc. And of course, part of the experience of socialization is kind of setting new boundaries, because you're encountering new experiences. So in connection to campus culture and sexual or hookup violence, etc., what does that culture imply, and what do we see? What are the experiences of students? So particularly we see that disclosing abuse or assault is more difficult because it's a smaller community and because of the newness of the situation, etc. The other thing we see is that foreign students who might be on campuses, and there are a lot of campuses with foreign students on them, would be unfamiliar with American culture and would be might be unfamiliar with campus hookup culture. So they are quite vulnerable because they may not understand the nuances of what's expected in a hookup relationship. Coercive control is often hard to also recognize and identify in situations where you have the relationship is one of friends with benefits. So for example, somebody might say, oh, why don't you skip class and we'll just hang out and have breakfast together and so on. And that may be a very lovely sentiment, but when it changes into coercive control, you may not be able to identify it as such. And for foreign students, for instance, skipping class and so on affects their, can affect your grade and can affect then your student status. So it's hard sometimes to recognize these tactics of coercive control. The other thing we see on campuses is that there's a lot of minimization of sexual violence or any kinds of assault by other female students, and that often silences victims. So you get the kind of, what's the big deal? So there are a few pictures of your breasts sexted. Don't make a fuss. So that approach or that attitude or that dismissal of minimizing what happened to a victim silences that person, and there's less disclosure. Systems on campus discourage reporting, and campus procedures for reporting abuse are generally not survivor-centered, and they're not trauma-informed. I don't know if many of you have seen the film The Hunting Ground, which talks about sexual violence on campus, and one of the points they bring up in their discussions and in their portrayal of campus procedures is that a lot of times the procedures are about avoiding litigation risk, and that prevents the procedures from being survivor-centered and trauma-informed. Next slide. So just touching a little bit on the Asian contextual factors. Next slide, please. I want to point out some of the issues that affect Asian students on campus. And I want to start by reminding all of us that, Asian students range from a whole variety of backgrounds, class backgrounds, religious backgrounds, immigration status, etc. And they come from, like all of us, come from traditional families to very progressive families. However, as we often know, that even open-minded families suddenly become very traditional when it involves something connected to their daughters or their daughter's sexuality or their daughter's relationships. So there are many factors within the cultural constraints and within attitudes to gender roles and what's expected that inhibit sexual violence disclosure. So when there is any abuse on campus in a hooking up or talking to a relationship, often there are barriers to disclosure. What are some of these barriers? What are some of these inhibitions to disclosure? In many Asian communities, young adult women and teens are not even supposed to be dating. So if you're not supposed to be dating, how can you ask for help because you've been abused, because it will reveal that you've been dating? So that's one inhibition to disclosure. The other is the presence of victim blaming, which is supported in general largely by not just Asian communities, by larger communities of sexism. And abusers also engage in victim blaming. So when you have family and abusers engaged in victim blaming, it has a chilling, silencing effect. It makes victims feel stigmatized, and it ensures that other people who see that victim blaming happening will also not disclose. So that's the chilling effect it has. Disclosure can also compromise and jeopardize women's self-determination. So if she discloses that she's been, she's a survivor of a sexual assault, parents or other adult family members might insist that she has to drop out of school or transfer colleges or move to a campus, move to a college campus that's near home, or in some cases in very traditional families, women are expected to marry the person who rapes them to preserve family honor. So again, disclosing would compromise and jeopardize that ability for self-determination. Ignorance about anatomy and sexuality. This is often used in many Asian homes. The young girls and women are kept in ignorance because it's seen as protective. If they don't know about this stuff, they won't engage in it. But as we all know, ignorance, in fact, elevates risk. And sometimes it's, in any assault situation, in any sexual situation, there's a lot of confusion. It's not always clear what happened, and you can't always describe what happened, and things change very quickly. So with the added ignorance about anatomy or sexuality, there's another layer of inhibition to reveal that one's been victimized. Homophobia is another element. Many LGBTQ survivors stay silent because there are high levels of homophobia within the family or the community, and that ends up silencing them. And then shame. So we have the whole issue of shame, which is often equated with survivors' public disclosure. So there's more shame attached to telling that you were abused or raped than shame attached to perpetrating. And to, so there's more shame attached to the survivor than to the abuser. Looking at this, in India, there was a big rape case that brought a lot of attention to the issue. And one of the important campaigns that then got launched was the notion of making shame change sides, so that the shame doesn't accrue to women. Next slide, please. One complicating factor about Asian students on the campuses that you are peer educators on is that many of them are not citizens. So who are and that means that they have different levels of acculturation. Of course, many Asian students are born here, multi-generations in the U.S. But there are different levels of acculturation definitely affect students who are here on as foreign students. Students who come on dependent immigrant visas, so these are students, these are individuals whose partners have a work visa and they are not able to work, so they might end up, enrolling in a college. The Dreamers refers to undocumented individuals who came as young children to the U.S. and now in the last 4 years, because of the DREAM Act, they are able to attend college, but they're still undocumented. They don't have citizenship or residency status. And 1.5 generation refers to people who've come to the country before the age of 15. So they may have grown up in another country and are acculturated to that culture, and then they're here as young teens, and so there are a lot of different acculturation issues. And of course, there are students lacking in English fluency. So if you have this range of acculturation and different non-citizen students, you need different strategies to as peer health educators. So very quickly, what are some of these strategies? Next slide, please. Of course, in all cases, it's important to review campus administrative policies, and in this instance, it is to identify what's missing that would apply to foreign students or students who do not have residency status. It's also important to ensure that campus administrators use and suggest remedies that allow students to maintain their immigration status. So one of the remedies is a U visa, But there are other things that happen on campus that are typically used as remedies, and these do not work if you're a foreign student. So for instance, in dealing with the trauma of an assault, an administrator might suggest, well, you can change your grade, you can take your class just for a pass-fail grade, and that'll allow you to kind of get yourself back on your feet. Well, foreign students need to maintain a GPA to stay in college. Or one of the remedies that might be suggested was, well, you don't have to work at the campus library or the campus store where your assailant also works, but that affects that affects foreign students because they're not allowed to work off campus. So they are not then able to get any financial aid. Another remedy that's often suggested is, well, you can drop a class or take a lower course load, but many students need to maintain a full-time course load to stay enrolled as students. So those kinds of remedies are very important for campus administrators and for you as peer educators. You're not going to know all these remedies, but to be aware that students have different remedies that are often not suggested. In addition, of course, there's collaboration between systems on campus, having bilingual trauma-informed advocates. Whilst even most students might speak English because that's part of what is expected when they come to college, but when there's a crisis, they might want to speak or have somebody they can turn to and use the language that they're more familiar with at home. Confidentiality policies, of course, need to be in place to protect victims, and then policies to ensure, policies that need to deal with foreign students who are perpetrators is a big area of that needs to be reviewed. Okay, so we now turn to Umi Hankins, who will talk about cultural context in the from the African American student's perspective. Umi, could you mute your phone, please?
I'm sorry about that. I thought I clicked on it and it didn't actually take. So thank you, Chick. Appreciate that. And Kate, and welcome everyone to the webinar. I want to talk a little bit for just a short period of time about the realities within the Black community, because it's these realities that will have to be looked at, will have to be considered as far as when you're approaching this issue of what's happening in the sexual and domestic violence context of what someone is experiencing. People don't experience those things outside of the domain of their life experiences. And so all of that has to be combined, and understanding then what are the needs of victims from the Black community when you're working with them. And the first thing I think it's necessary for us to understand is that the Black community is very, very diverse. Many times that we think of the Black community and then we begin to say African American community, and we make those things synonymous. But the Black community is very diverse. And if we were to look at this picture, we would not be able to say where any of the women in this picture are from. Are they African American and U.S. born? Are they African Caribbean? Are they African Latino? Are they from Africa and African immigrants that now attend your school? Or even maybe refugees that have come here. And all of those dynamics then create a history in their background that frames how they're going to respond to support or lack of support from any systems or nonprofit supportive community-based organizations. All of those things position them in a way as to what they should look at. So we have this issue of race identity that we see within this picture, and then we also have this image of ethnicity. I think there's another group also that within who is Black, as we define Black women in their cultural experiences, then we have to also look at biracial individuals. And to that point, we may think about someone in a position as Tiger Woods when we look at Tiger Woods and we say, oh, he's Black, but yet we know that he's biracial and not white and Black. So it's not just who is mixed with white and Black, who is Thai, who is Chinese and Black, who is Latino, or Spanish, Hispanic and Black. All of those things can be combined to make an individual's appearance to be framed in one way from their perspective and then be perceived by the person that's working with them. I think this is important because as Black women, as Black people here in the U.S., then there is a way in which we are perceived and stereotypes and attributes that are placed on us that then ensure that people keep us in a marginalized and disenfranchised position. So that's the importance here, is that we understand that when we look at someone, we really cannot tell what their history is, what their life experience has been, and therefore it's a need for us to be able to work with them. I understand their values, understand their beliefs, what their culture is, and it's not all synonymous for each individual. Next, please. So in that cultural context, as what was said earlier, is that not only do individuals have an identified culture or belief pattern, values, but being within a university context, we see that as well. And we know that not only do we have predominantly white educational institutions in which there may be a few Black students who attend that particular educational institute, but you could also have HBCUs, historical Black colleges and universities, that have their culture as well. So whereas they may be a few on the predominantly white educational institute campus, there may be more individuals who identify with each other on the historical Black college and universities, but the cultures of both of those categories of institutions may be very different, and how that person feels as though individuals can relate to them or not relate to them. But what we also know is on both of those types of campuses, there's a rampant amount of sexual assault that is happening, and violence against women and domestic violence that's happening on the college campus. And so even though they have very, very different culture, they're very different cultural environments that a Black student may be in, we know that they each still are having environments that are not really addressing the needs of those students that are there. We also know that Black students may be first generational in going to attend a college or university, and so they may not have the understanding of what that culture is on a predominantly white university or the historical Black campus, and therefore they're blending in. They're coming to that campus as who they are, but may not really understand all the nuances that take place within, or how they may be perceived there. We also know that Black men are not attending or graduating from college at the same rate as Black females, and so this generates more women than men that are now attending college, whereas that's a change in historical ways in which it was perceived. And we know that there is considerably more women than men that attend college, and therefore it creates sometimes this thought that women have to compete for a relationship with someone while they're on the campus, that they have to perhaps give in more, or that they are perceived as not willing to do anything that's necessary in order to have a relationship with a partner on that campus and position that way. And so when things go wrong in a relationship, then there are plenty other women that they can choose from. This then, of course, infuses with the individual's sense of empowerment, sense of well-being, and sense of value and worth. And therefore she may continue to feel minimized. Black students bring their own history of life experience and culture, all their past traumas and intersecting oppressions with them to both of those situational environments, and so those campuses. And as they bring them then, as we said, their expressions of how they relate to others that are there, if they grew up in inner city, if they grew up in rural life, if they have a different language that they speak. As we said, particularly in Africa, we know that there are 2,000 languages, 8,000 dialects. They bring that with them as how they are going to communicate their feelings or their religious beliefs or their sexual orientation. Next, please. So as individuals identify with their race, their gender, and other aspects of their identity that we just talked about, we know that they experience racism and sexism, classism, and homophobia, and all of those other factors that relate to it. And so on each of those campuses, whether it's a predominantly white institution or it's a historical black institution, there may be issues, experience of racism, sexism, or oppression overall, but also there could also be ways in which internalized oppression is experienced. And historically, black women have been socialized to be protectors of their family and black men and their communities, which comes up through slavery. And so in that women are not valued in the same way that men are valued overall in our community, then it may be very well that women are receiving the blame for the relationship failing, or that they are not valuing the football player, the star football player, who's now going to lose his career if this black woman tells that she was raped by that player. Black men are perceived as being endangered and victims of the system, which goes to the fact that, again, of their need for protection, and then black women being seen as their role as being a strong black woman and needing to protect in order to ensure that the black man or black woman won't be victims of the system, but this sense that we are willing to sacrifice ourselves sometimes because we can, because we know that we're needed in order to have this inclusion within our race as being seen as supportive and not a traitor. Our bodies are sexualized. Both men and women's bodies are sexualized. Black bodies are sexualized, and therefore black women being seen as that they wanted it, that they ask for it. Black men as being stereotyped as being very prowess, as you know, there are many images in which we have men on a slave block compared to the athletes and how they're being sold to the various schools or to franchises. Next, please.
This is your moderator. You have about 2.5 minutes left.
Thank you very much. I wanted to bring up this image. This image is of the Rutgers women's basketball team, in case you did not recognize it. And if you recall, they were called nappy-headed hoes by Amos, who is a radio commentator, very famous radio commentator. But it's the way in which black women are devalued, the way in which they're perceived, that all black women could somehow fit into this category of nappy-headed hoes. And here we have the prize of our community, our young girls going to college, getting a degree. These are our stars, and yet stereotypically can be classified as just nappy-headed hoes, wanting it, demanding the sex, demanding to have a man, doing whatever is necessary to be in that position. Next, please. So this intersection of racism and sexism tends to encourage or support this environment that is accepting of black women, violence against black women. And we then have to figure out, how do we make sure that we're addressing that issue? How are we evening out those stereotypes? How are we denying them? How are we ensuring that black girls understand their values and how they have a right to be safe? How are we ensuring that black boys also, and then in homosexual relationship or transgendered populations, ensuring that the diversity of that of their identities are also valued on the campus? We need to also make sure that as black women are blamed for their own victimization, that we present to them evidence that it is not their fault. And they are blamed because of the way in which they're stereotyped and perceived, and even their strategies of protection. So I've talked to students on campus and educators, and they talk about the black girls writing down on black boys and getting even with them. Well, if they're not being protected, and we have this image of ourselves as being strong women and needing to survive, needing to protect ourselves, then this self-protection being viewed as then this negative perception creating more of a situation for black women to continue to be victimized. And then systemic oppression creates the trauma that black women are experiencing. And this is not only disrupting for their lives, but their children's lives, because we don't lose trauma. That it's the system oppression, the systemic oppression that creates the trauma. We very often want to say that trauma is something that happens to us, not something that we did, but it's what is the underpinnings of what created that trauma, and that's what we have to address. Next, please. And so I wanted to give some stats because there is this disproportionate rate in which black females in our community are subjected to violence at a higher prevalence, disproportional rate than other counterparts. And so this then impacts a higher rate that they experience homicides, that they experience poor health outcomes and risk for continued homelessness, domestic violence, and other sexual assault events in their lives. So please consider these things as we're looking at strategies for increasing awareness regarding the necessity of identifying the intersection of race, gender, and other self-identities in addressing violence against women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. This is your moderator. So now we turn to Lumari Orozco from the Casa de Esperanza.
Thank you, Chick. So I want to thank both Chick and Omi. You've shared some great information.
Lumari, you've muted yourself. We can't hear you. Hello, Lumari. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was muted on my computer. I wanted to thank both Chick and Omi for the great information that you both shared, and just wanted to point out that there are a lot of commonalities between our cultures and what young women are experiencing, and our cultural values and some of our cultural contexts in which sexual violence and dating violence happens. And I did want to just briefly note that, what we've been able and what we're sharing with you today is a very brief overview of the realities of our communities, and I think I can maybe speak for all of us is I really do encourage you as peer educators on your college campuses to really reach out to and develop partnerships with the diverse student groups that are on campus. It's a great opportunity to be able to learn a little bit more about the racially and ethnically diverse communities on campus, and to really be able to bridge a better understanding of the realities of those particular students on campus. We're talking here, the information that we're sharing with you too is more of a national level, some of the things that we see locally, but it's also really important to be able to understand for yourselves what are the realities of the students on your campus. So with that being said, I'm going to just talk a little bit here about the cultural context, contextual factors that affect dating violence and sexual violence in the Latino community. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay, so the first thing that we'll talk about is just a little bit about feminismo and the importance of family. And it just really highlights the importance for Latino community members that family is central to who we are. And it's the most important thing for us. We have very specific and strong gender roles. We view the roles of our fathers as the primary winners, as the men of the home, and our mothers typically are more in a role of the caretakers, and they're the ones who keep our families together, and oftentimes both young women and young men in our communities are socialized to believe and to live this way. This cultural value of feminismo, which really does impact how how we might react to a sexual violence situation, and also how we might be perpetrators of sexual violence against others. The next slide, please. So another cultural value that's really important to keep in mind, again, is just the strong gender role expectations in Latino communities. And this varies across the spectrum depending on what your acculturation level is. For example, if you're born in the States and have grown in the United States and in American culture, the expectations are a little bit different as far as what your gender role expectations are. For example, if you're coming from newly immigrant communities or newly immigrant to the United States, again, there's a variety there on what those roles might look like. For many of the young people in our communities, what we see is there continue to be strong gender roles expectations regardless of whether you're born in the United States or whether you were born in your country of origin and are living here in the States. So an example of that would be, a young woman who would typically, a high school student or a young woman in college who might still be living at home, that the expectation isn't that you're only a college student and that your sole responsibility is to be in school and do the best that you can. But your responsibility also includes being able to provide a parental role to your younger siblings at home, for example. So let's say that you're a freshman in college and you're living at home. The expectation, again, it just is that you're not just going to be a student and you're not going to be able to have some of the opportunities, experiences that other students on college campuses have, because the expectations are that since family is so central to who we truly are, you have a responsibility to be able to fulfill that role and support your family in whatever way that looks like. Can we get the next slide, please? And a thing also to consider, and it's something that Umi mentioned a little bit, and I believe Chick did as well, is that religion it plays a significant role in how Latinas and their decisions to address dating or sexual violence. I know I give the example here of the sanctity of marriage. A lot of the young women oftentimes in our communities, when they go off to college, oftentimes find themselves already married when they're going off to college. And also a role that religion may play or that could be a barrier in accessing services or coming out and having conversations around sexual violence is that, a lot of times our religious beliefs keep us from having those conversations around sexuality, sex, sexual violence, and things of that nature. Next slide, please. And so another thing to consider, and something that Chick mentioned in her presentation, her piece of the presentation, is about those students who are not U.S. citizens, students who are foreign-born, students who are undocumented immigrants. This is a reality that we need to take into consideration because it does get in the way. Oftentimes, what we see on college campuses is students who are, able to actually be a part of college life and experience have that college experience. Oftentimes, those undocumented students are more likely to keep themselves hidden and out of eyes way to ensure that they're by no way discovered or that they have, they come across an opportunity that may impact whether or not they're able to stay on a college campus and continue their education. So oftentimes what we see with survivors, young women who are victims of sexual assault and dating violence, is that they don't come out and share, or they don't seek services on college campuses for fear of not knowing what's going to happen once they do. Oftentimes there's that whole misunderstanding or not really understanding that if I were to seek services that there are legal remedies available for me, as Chick pointed out with the U visa, or the fact that they don't know that, the campus police might not act as immigration enforcement agents. So those are some of the things to consider as some of the realities of Latino young people who may be living on your college campuses. Next slide, please. So what we've learned, can I get the next slide? Okay, thank you. So what we're learning, what we've learned through our work, both with high school students and early college students, is there's a sea of misinformation out there. So the reality is for a lot of the young people in our community is that we're not having these conversations around what healthy relationships are or what sexual violence is or what dating violence looks like. And oftentimes they're confused. The information that they're getting primarily comes from media, music, TV, articles that they read. But the reality is that we're not having these conversations, and it's key for us, and it's key for you all as peer educators to understand that, to remember that as you're working with young people on your campus, that oftentimes there's a lack of information, and the information that might have is just erroneous information. More times than not, we know that young people get information from other young people, right, their friends. And their friends don't always have the most correct information. So it's really important to as peer educators, that when you're out here doing this work, that you consider that you remember that, hey, these young people out here might not have the information, or if they do, it's information that might not be, good information for them. Next slide, please.
This is your moderator. This is your 3-minute warning.
Oh, thank you very much, Chick. So what we know is that it does exist. Dating violence and sexual violence exists among young adults in the Latino community. We see it every day. But what we've learned, too, is that, when we talk to young people about teen dating violence and sexual violence, especially in the Latino community, it's not something that they identify with, right? So oftentimes young people don't have the language, the vernacular, the words to put in action to the things that have happened. Very interesting, some work that we did a couple of years ago with young adults around teen dating violence was actually having them define what that means. And what we learned was that young people don't relate to the term dating violence, again, because young people aren't dating. Oftentimes on college campuses, it is a hookup kind of environment. Or you're either jumping into a relationship right away, or it's just strictly a sexual relationship that it's not really a relationship in which you've taken the time to get to know each other. So that's important for us to remember. We also remember that it's important to know that young people oftentimes don't seek help about when they have incidents or experience incidences of dating violence for many different reasons. Oftentimes for Latino young people, one of those things that keeps them, that gets in the way of them seeking services is that whole immigration piece, right? Or the fact that they just haven't had these conversations with their parents, so they really don't know who they can trust or who they can go to. And also very important, too, to remember that a lot of the young people who might come your way and you might be working with often experience multiple incidences of victimization. So this is not the first time that something might have happened to them. A lot of young people in our community have experienced childhood sexual abuse. They experience abuse in their countries of origin, different types of abuse. And we also see a lot of young people, particularly young women, who end up in relationships with much older men. And those are situations, of statutory rape that we see quite a bit as well. Can I get the next slide, please? And so this is just a little bit of information, and I'll just leave it up there for you to take a look at. But I only included it because there's very little data on Latino young people on college campuses who experience dating violence and sexual violence. And this is some information that's been available as it pertains to high school age students. And just knowing that these are the young people that you're going to be working with next year. These are the young people that you're going to be working with in the next couple of years to come. So I just wanted to share that tidbit of information. Next slide, please. So we know, again, we know that it's happening in the Latino community, and oftentimes dating violence and sexual violence it's normalized, again, because young people grow up in environments where these conversations aren't had, where they don't have information to compare it to. So when you don't know what a healthy relationship looks like, you don't know what an unhealthy relationship looks like. There have been situations where we've worked with young women by way of doing healthy relationship workshops, where it's in those workshops that they are able to identify and discover for the first time that the sexual violence that they're experiencing is actually sexual violence. For many of them, they have been undergoing abuse for so long that it's just normal for them, and that's what they've known, and it's hard for them to identify that not having anything else to compare it to. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so here are some of the things that get in the way of young people seeking services on college campuses. It's the limited access to services or not knowing that services are available, which is huge. And that's why it's so important for you all to be able to connect with the diverse student groups on campus, right? So you have an opportunity to do some learning from them as far as the reality of those students on campus, but it also provides you with an opportunity to be able to share the information that you have as far as what are the services available, where young people get help, because then that'll allow those students and those diverse student groups to be able to share that information among their peer groups. There's limited support networks. Sometimes there's mental health and substance abuse issues that get in the way. And again, these are just issues that young people are dealing with, sometimes as part of the experience of the dating and sexual violence that they're experiencing. Next slide, please.
Lumari, could you please just go to the most pertinent points you want to make?
Sure. Here, let me go. Can you go to the next slide, Kate? Go ahead. I think I have too many slides. Go ahead. And these pieces, so I'll just leave it here. I'll leave you with this. Just really know when you're approaching the young people that you want to work with, understand the realities. Just take the time to learn who they are. Again, that's why I encourage you to just really tap into the diverse student community groups on campus. Get to know about them. Let them teach you about what is happening on campus for their particular community. Value the experiences of culturally and diverse students on campus. Focus on their strengths and really honor them as the experts. You know, we've got a lot to learn from each other. And I know that you all as peer educators have tons of information and knowledge to impart on them as well. So I really encourage you to be able to do that. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Chick, Umi, and Lumadi, for those really important points, really critical information for this work on college campuses. So I want to start off saying that in order to understand the importance of your role as peer health educators in promoting healthy relationships and supporting survivors, we've got to spend a moment on going over some of the short-term and long-term effects that intimate partner violence and sexual violence can have on someone's health. Many people who have experienced this kind of trauma also experience serious health repercussions, which I feel like, maybe we might know about, but not know to the great extent that it actually does happen. So survivors are not only more likely to experience PTSD and immediate injury after an assault, but also this huge host of various different issues that might come up for folks. So women who experience domestic violence are 80% more likely to have a stroke, 70% more likely to have heart disease, and 60% more likely to have asthma, just to name a few. So I'm going to skip this chat in the interest of time. We're going to get to questions in a little bit. But so we kind of have already talked about your unique role as peer health educators, but you are seen as a trusted resource on your campus, particularly around health issues and women's health. Survivors access health care more often than they seek any other services, like even mental health counseling or reporting to the police or to someone else. And then also the large body of research that I just touched on about the health impacts of intimate partner violence and sexual violence and how that relates to your work as peer health educators. So just a quick fact that receiving medical care decreased a woman's risk of further sexual assault by 32%, and this really comes back to the importance of them having someone to go to talk about options, which is really your role. So before just starting the conversation with someone around these issues, these steps listed here are really important, that you get the background information on your local school's policy and procedure, climate around reporting violence, maybe how a survivor could access the campus clinic, how would they get a rape kit if that's something they wanted to do. Find out if you're a mandatory reporter in your state or maybe a mandatory reporter on your campus. That's something you would definitely want to be open and honest about. And how does someone access emergency contraception? And then definitely campus and local domestic violence and sexual assault resources for survivors. And then are the clinics, counseling options, and survivor support programs on your campus accessible to people who are undocumented? Are they queer friendly? Are they, represent all different kinds of races? And do they cater to folks who are English language learners? So this is just one of the Health Resource Center's cards that we put out as a safety card around getting the conversation started. So we often say a good place to start is by talking about healthy relationships. So you can see here's a little quiz that folks can start to think about if they're in a healthy relationship. And I'm going to talk about how you can access these cards a little bit later. So some really important points are what not to say when a survivor might come up to you looking for help, or maybe a survivor's friend, sees your peer educator and they're thinking, oh, this person's a great resource. So here's some things not to say. You should definitely go report or immediately get a rape kit. So we definitely don't want to be taking away someone's choice. So we really don't even want to be giving advice. Our role, or your role as a health educator, would be more giving options. You're providing someone who knows their situation best with all of the options so that they can make the most informed decision. You wouldn't want to say something like, you are definitely in an abusive relationship, or that doesn't sound like rape to me. We're not trying to define someone else's experience for them. That would maybe alienate them or make them feel like you're not actually a trusted resource. You might want to steer away from saying things like your partner is crazy, you need to break up with them. We don't want to talk badly about someone's partner who is hurting them, because that, again, could make someone feel judged and on the defensive. This one, I think, is hopefully more known. We don't want to definitely don't want to be victim blaming, saying things like, were you drunk, were you using the buddy system, implying that they, were perhaps sexually assaulted because of things they did do or didn't do, or what did you do to set them off? So we really want to steer clear to not say things like that. And then lastly, so tell me what happened after that, and what happened after that. We also, it's not really our role to be getting all the details. A lot of times survivors are not in the state of mind where they can remember all of the details in the first place, and also you're not the person who needs to collect all of those details. You're the person who's going to maybe hear a little bit about what happened so that you can offer support. This all really comes back to us kind of checking our own biases and our own assumptions, kind of coming back to what Umi was talking about, and not being judgmental. So again, I'm going to skip the chat, but I just was kind of hoping for you all to think about what are some supportive alternatives to these kind of unhelpful responses. So some things that I came up with were being upfront and open about what you are required to report if you are a mandatory reporter. Another way to kind of break the ice a little bit maybe, which is just say, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. It is not okay, but it is really common, and you are not alone. This is not your fault. Nothing you did caused this. Someone else made a choice to hurt you. One way that you could express concern would be to say something like, what you're telling me makes me feel worried about your safety, or worried about your health, or just worried about you. And where you could go from there is, would you like me to explain options and resources that other survivors have often been interested in hearing about? Some survivors find talking to an advocate or a counselor to be helpful. You might get people who say, what would you do? What would you do? And wanting advice. But again, it's really important to come back to your role not as an advice giver, but more as an options provider. And then find out if there's anything else that they need information around, or ways that they can be supported by you. So here's another example of a safety card that we use when we're trying to kind of prompt conversation around unhealthy relationships. And this might be something that you just pass out to folks, saying this is a card that we give to tons and tons of students because sexual violence and intimate partner violence or dating violence, what have you, is so common. I'm trying to give this card out to everyone so they can go through these questions for themselves. And then we also have one specifically more focused on campus sexual assault. So normalizing the card, if you end up using a resource like this or this particular resource, definitely saying, I use this card with everyone. Do a quick review. It talks about healthy relationships and how health might affect, or how violence might affect your health. And then maybe going on to refer them, point out the hotline or local referrals numbers that could be on the card. In terms of providing a warm referral, we say that when you can connect to a local program or school-based program, it really makes all the difference. So that might not just be passing them, a hotline number, but it could be offering to sit with them while they call. Maybe they need to use the phone in your peer health educator office to get to call, or maybe it means, walking them to the clinic so that they could call with a nurse or something like that. It really is about supporting them and making that connection if that's something that they end up actually wanting to do. So this whole webinar has been so much information, and I know that it can kind of be overwhelming, but a really good point to remember is that you don't have to know all of this stuff to help people. You don't have to remember all of the different warning signs or all the different tactics of abuse or everything. And that's kind of the role of domestic violence advocates or sexual assault advocates or rape crisis counselors. They are the people who are paid to know about emergency services and counseling and legal remedies, especially for things outside of your campus context. They're going to be the people who are going to be able to really help folks kind of going forward. So we really recommend getting in touch with your local services. Maybe you have an on-campus rape crisis hotline, or maybe you have, a domestic violence shelter in your town. Definitely reach out to those people, learn about what services they provide, and how you can get people into their services. All right, so I just want to end quickly with some options for students who are interested in seeking help. We do have a couple resources here up on the screen. There's the sexual assault hotline that has an online chat. Then also loveisrespect.org, which is more focused on dating violence. They also have an online chat and texting. And then the National Domestic Violence Hotline. All of these hotlines can connect folks to local resources. So if you happen to not have looked up a local resource in your area, these folks will be able to do that for someone. So you can definitely connect them to them as well. In terms of campus awareness, I just want to talk a little bit about how universal education is a piece of the prevention puzzle. So a lot of your role won't just be talking with individual survivors or friends of survivors. It'll be talking to large groups of people who are doing this, who are interested in it, or trying to do activism on campus, because that is really, really a huge thing right now on college campuses, activism around that, and you all should definitely be a part of that. It can be incorporated into any other health prevention programming you have, and you also have a special role of advocating for campus resources for survivors. Some examples of things you might be interested in doing are having, maybe at a resource fair or at a health fair, having a table on healthy relationships. Obviously with candy is a plus, where you have maybe like a quiz or a bingo where students rate healthy behaviors, warning signs, and unhealthy behaviors, or rank them. Or you can come up with something more creative than that. Or you could partner with maybe other groups on campus, maybe some of the ethnic or racial student unions to host panels or talks with folks who are doing this work in your community around healthy relationships, or perhaps do something like a Cedar for Change around modeling healthy relationships. So I don't want to cut into our question time too much. Chick, do you want to briefly talk about engaging men?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, this is Chick Dabby, and what I wanted to say is, we're so used to talking and working in the frame of sexual violence and all the harms that it causes and so on. But I really want to encourage all of us to think about, well, what do we want? It's not just that we want a violence-free world. Yes, we want that. But what do we want in its place, too? What we want gender equality. We want love that is respectful. We want all these things. And so our work in terms of engaging men has focused on how do we get our communities to divest from the notion of gender violence and how normative it is, and to invest in gender equality. So I'd really urge all of us to think about these campus conversations to also start including these questions of what do we want.
Great. So some next steps for you all, kind of coming back to what I mentioned earlier around understanding your school policy, procedure, and climate around reporting, connecting with local organizations to make sure that folks have a place where they can reach out and get services, and maybe also connecting with local resources or campus resources for queer folks, for undocumented and foreign students, and diverse community groups. Then definitely you'll want to clarify your role for yourself as a mandatory reporter. You could start to plan events, resource fairs, activities around healthy relationships. And lastly, because you are someone who has this role in your community, you want to be an upstander, and that means modeling healthy relationships in your communities, calling out rape jokes and warning sign behaviors, not only in a classroom setting, but also among your friends. And then definitely intervening in times where you see something like someone trying to get another person drunk to sleep with them, and things like that. So it's really important for, because you're wearing this hat as someone who is a resource in your community, to be an upstander as well. And I know this list kind of looks like a lot of things and kind of daunting, so maybe you want to break it up with other health educators on your campus and then come back and present to each other or something around like that. So I'm going to end with just a slide on our National Health Resource Center on Domestic Violence, where you can access those safety cards that I mentioned and showed, and lots of other resources around how health is affected by violence and related things. So, and if anyone has any questions about that, they can go to healthcaresaboutipv.org and find out a lot more, and also get in contact with us at Futures Without Violence. And so I'm going to pass it back to Teddy, I guess, who's going to help us with the Q&A.
All right, great. Thanks, Kate, Chick, Lumari, and Umi. Thank you a lot. We have a few questions we're going to try to get through quickly in the interest of time. So I have a question about addressing relationships where you think both partners are abusive to each other. I don't know who wants to field that question.
I can talk a little bit.
This is Umi, and I'd like to take it from the...
Umi, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to briefly answer. So this is something that's common with domestic violence in the Black community, where it's perceived that couples are mutually violent, and many times both are arrested. And again, as I talked about the issue of Black women having this need to protect themselves because society in general has not done that, and so, or they're seen as the strong Black woman, or there may be some mantra in the community that says, you let him hit you, then feeling that they have to defend themselves. And so in law enforcement, we're always advising about who's the primary aggressor. What is really the framing of this? Is someone being perceived as being loud and aggressive or mean, as Black women are stereotyped many times? That's not the same thing as domestic violence. And so there's a need for us to identify what are the dynamics around violence that are happening, and to then qualify that on who is that primary aggressor in that relationship.
This is Kate. I'll add on to that. Just saying can be really difficult from an outside perspective to tell kind of who is the more predominant aggressor, who has the power and control in the situation and is using it, and then who is the person who is using possibly abusive tactics to survive an abusive relationship. It can be difficult to tell that. But either way, us as providers and folks who have resources, kind of no matter who you're talking to, you can always offer to connect people to mental health services and counselors saying, you know, some of the stuff I've seen in your relationship or maybe some of the things you're telling me makes me worried, and I'd be happy to, you know, tell you about the mental health services or the counselors on our campus. So either way, that kind of works for both parties.
Thank you, ladies. So Kate, the future safety cards, they're available on the link that's on the screen right now?
That's correct. So they're available on our online store, which you can access through healthcaresaboutipv.org. They're available for free download and free ordering, but for ordering you just pay a small shipping fee.
Excellent. And for those of you requesting the slides, I have sent my email address. Please go to cowusu@minorityhealth.hhs.gov. Just request the slides and I'll send them out to you. Kate, could you also go back to the slide where you had the resources with the hotline on it and everything,
yes,
so they can see that information as well? I have a question here from Jennifer Ruiz. Is there material about gender violence, women on men?
A lot of material out there is pretty gender neutral. We know that violence happens, you know, is perpetrated by both women and men, and definitely both women and men experience it, whether that is in same-sex or queer relationships or in straight relationships. I don't know if anyone else wants to address specific material on that.
This is Chick from the Asian Pacific Institute. We don't have any particular materials on it, but it kind of goes to the earlier question. And I just want to say that there's often a sort of, we overlook many aspects, you know, as Umi, as you pointed out, who's the primary aggressor, where's the pattern of power and control, etc. But we also have to understand the sort of biology. If somebody's attacked, you don't just go limp and do nothing. Sometimes you may strike back or do something, and then that gets depicted as, oh, she's the violent aggressor, or so she used violence. So that's one point I want to make. And the other, in terms of, you know, who's using what violence, women often also internalize victim blaming and internalize blame. And so they're often very readily say, oh, I did it, it's my fault, I used violence. So these points are not all to sort of excuse the use of violence or to think that women never use violence. Yes, women do, but it brings us back to understanding the context. And so we have to understand the context so that we can provide help to everybody in that situation.
I agree, Chick. I think that we need to find how to have more conversations, in-depth conversations around this, because it is very common that as we talk about violence, then if you look at sexism and how it happens, is that many times that women are blamed. Again, as Chick said, that clearly women use violence, but what's the context of how they use violence? And so they require more in-depth conversations.
Okay, thank you for those answers. We have a response from one of the attendees regarding the women on male violence. They suggested going to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, or RAINN. The website is rainn.org. Let's see. Can we get you all's thoughts on relationship abuse within same-sex relationships?
This is Chick. In same-sex relationships, it's harder to identify who the victim and perpetrator is, and it does require some training. And sometimes what perpetrators do is also exploit that difficulty of the helpers, and you know, will appear to be the victim, but again, it's understanding the context, asking the questions that then help figure out who's the perpetrator and who's the victim. You know, in general, it's really important to understand that everybody needs some sort of intervention or attention, and we don't, and so how we arrange our systems so that they are trauma-informed, so that they don't, as other presenters have pointed out, reflexively blame victims or make judgments about them.
And from a peer counselor's perspective, we always have to analyze, as we said earlier, our own way of looking at what is a couple, what is a relationship, and make sure that our own personal biases are not coming into the fold of what we're willing to do or how we're willing to support. So we know that violence does happen between the LGBTQ community and partners, that it does happen, and that we need to ensure that we're open to ensuring that we're not stereotyping individuals within those relationships on what it looks like and why it's occurring, or even on their own sexuality. So so it's very important that we be open to hearing those statements and to welcoming individuals in those relationships. We also know that those couples receive a lot of negative information and in response from their own communities. So if we're talking about the African American community, the Black community, because of the heavy religious connotations that go throughout our community, there are a lot of times very negative things that are said about LGBTQ relationships. And so again, how do we make sure that we're not taking our own religious beliefs, personal beliefs, and then denying someone who is in great need of counseling and support of that element at a time when it's important?
I would also just add on, thanks for whoever asked that question. I think it's really important to remember that as scary and how much courage it takes to reach out and ask for help, how much more courage it might take if you are maybe not out as queer or LGBTQ, and then having to reach out for help saying, I'm in this, not only am I a survivor, but I also am in a relationship that I haven't maybe told my family about yet. So it's another layer of kind of being scared of talking to someone. So us as providers and peer health educators to really be mindful of what it takes for someone to come forward and talk to us about the abuse they're experiencing.
Alrighty, a couple more questions. Again, we want to point out that males can be victims as well. In those situations, can you all give us some information on what to say, what not to say when addressing male victims?
I would say that it is not too much different. You're going to want to give them the same messages of, I'm really sorry that happened to you. What you're telling me makes me worried. How can I connect you to resources? Knowing that there's another layer of, men coming forward, they might be experiencing another layer or a different layer of shame saying that they are a survivor. So just kind of being cognizant of how hard it is for everyone to come forward and ask for help about abuse. I don't know if anyone else wants to add on to that.
The National Domestic Violence Hotline is also available for individuals, both male and female, who may be in need of safety planning, support around resources within their local community to get support around the domestic violence that they may be experiencing. And so there's also the National Dating Abuse Helpline, which offers chat in the evenings as well as an 800 number for someone to call to get support. So those resources, in addition to offering, non-judgmental support and sharing concern around someone's safety and letting them know about the network of resources in the community, will be good tools to share with both men and women who are experiencing abuse.
Yes, thank you, Shondell. All of the resources that are on the screen right now are for everyone.
Great. Kate, can you go ahead and go to the last slide again? We have requests for the link for the info cards. Yep. And last question. This is, I guess, pertinent to the Asian community. So in situations where individuals are not supposed to be dating, how do you approach someone who you suspect is being abused?
Well, we can, as you know, Kate and others mentioned, it's always a way of saying, you know, I give this card to everybody. Somebody may need it and not need it, or you can give it to friends. So I think just in a very neutral way, you can say that. Or you can also say, you know, in our community, it's not often okay to even be dating or to disclose that that's happening. And just in case there's some abuse happening in the relationship that you're in, we don't make any judgments. Here's some information you can use, or I'm always open, available to listen to what's happening. The other thing is when you see signs of abuse, physical signs of abuse or emotional, or you recognize traumatic reactions or overreactions, to mention that and say sometimes people have these reactions when they've been abused, or when they're being harassed, or something is going very wrong in a relationship, or something's going very wrong with someone you trust. And if that's happening to you, we can, certainly talk about it. So I think just opening the door and normalizing the talking, because what's normalized is having abuse and being quiet, and what we have to normalize is, yep, the door's open, we can come and talk about it, we're not going to stigmatize you, we're not going to end up judging you. And so we normalize that help-seeking behavior as being a clear strategy. Just one last point I want to make about help-seeking is that many of us, whether we've been abused or are survivors of violence or not, many of us have negative experiences of help-seeking, and past negative experiences of help-seeking influence our future attempts. So oftentimes people are silenced because when they reached for help, it wasn't helpful. In fact, it made things worse. In fact, it made them feel more devalued, more blamed, etc. So again, normalizing that speaking up about abuse can prove helpful.
Okay, great. This concludes the webinar. I'd like to give a shout out to Shondell again. Thank you very much. And Damian Frierson from the Administration for Children and Families. Thank you for helping me put this whole thing together. Also, we would like to thank the Asian Pacific Islander Institute on Domestic Violence, Casa de Esperanza, the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community, and Futures Without Violence. For more information, please contact me to get these PowerPoints. There are plenty of resources and links within the PowerPoints. And I'd like to thank our guests for presenting, and everyone, please enjoy the rest of your day. And this concludes the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.